she even took the position. So you're talking about certainly the fall of SNCC, the fact that it has become extinct, but you're looking at other civil rights organizations that are struggling because of lack of funds, struggling because of the lack of stable, effective leadership, and also there's a sense in much of the society that these organizations have outlived their relevance, they've outlived their usefulness, that somehow or another they are anachronisms. But when we look at the climate of the country today, in terms of race relations, we know that these organizations still have some relevance, and it's just a matter of people supporting them and them developing a new vision that is consistent with 21st century realities.
In other words, the population is still there.
Yeah.
But these organizations are not developing programs and plans.
Some of them are, yes. The demographics are there, but the problem is, of course, that you're not getting the support for these organizations that you need. For an example, SCLC. You can talk about the lack of stable, effective leadership, but also the lack of a vision. What is the vision for SCLC beyond Martin Luther King Jr.? That has been a struggle for years, for the last half century. If you look at the NAACP, of course, you got Derrick Johnson as the president of the NAACP now. That organization is pretty strong, but it has gone also through periods when there were challenges around fundraising and effective leadership. If you look at CORE, you look at the Urban League, people don't talk about these organizations anymore. They are still there. They have affiliate organizations throughout the country. But I think the problem is that too many of us feel that there's no longer a need
for such organizations,
for these kinds of organizations. But we know differently now in the last couple of years with the forces of Trumpism taking over the country, that there is indeed.
As a matter of fact, there's a greater need if we're going to talk about the participation of African Americans in the political process, the voting, more than anything. I think that if we had an organization that could really get people out to vote, you know, if all of them decided to put all of their efforts simply on what? The vote. And then I think that we would really be powerful.
And the NAACP is doing that, and you take Al Sharpton's National Action Network, which was founded in 1991, is your most recent major black civil rights organization. There are efforts at voter registration. There are efforts to deal with voter suppression and voter intimidation. There are efforts to deal with police brutality and the challenges that African Americans are facing with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. So I don't want to give them the impression that nothing is being done, because these civil rights organizations are functional to some extent, but I think they can be more involved. The other problem, of course, is that you're getting challenges from the rise of civil rights organizations outside of the black community. You have anti-bullying organizations, you have LGBT political advocacy organizations, you have political advocacy organizations for women. So no longer should we speak in terms of black civil rights organizations or biracial civil rights organizations. You have to understand that civil rights organizations exist today for Hispanics, they exist for gay and lesbian groups, they exist for Asian Americans, Jewish Americans. So, and all of these organizations, I think, speak to the legacy of the civil rights movement. Because it started there.
That's exactly
and
it.
you can't understand these new civil rights organizations apart from what was happening with the NAACP and SNCC and CORE and the National Urban League.
Very good. And so it's still important for not only African Americans, but for all people to understand that these organizations are playing a very, very important part in terms of the constitutional situation for all people.
All Americans. They're talking about full human and civil rights for all people, irrespective of race, irrespective of religion, political differences. And that's the importance of, I think there's no greater need in history than today for these kinds of civil rights organizations, because we're facing problems with immigrations and what to do with immigrants, what to do with Muslims in light of the Muslim ban, what's to do with people from Central America.
Okay.
So civil rights organizations are very important.
Okay, so what we'll do, we'll take our second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and he's given us some information in reference to the rise and decline of the civil rights organizations in the United States. I think we might call it the rise and decline,
yeah,
Dr. Baldwin, because as you've indicated that they are still there.
But they've declined in the public imagination.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is to at least encourage people
Yeah.
to do more in reference to them and to find out more about them, because it's still important that they have, they still exist. And they
have an important role in assuring the continuation of our democratic norms, our democratic traditions, because you can't have democracy without these kinds of organizations fighting. Now, what I think should happen in the future is this. I think we have to reestablish a lot of these organizations on a stronger footing in terms of financial support, in terms of supporting strong, progressive, effective leadership. But I also think that we have to think in terms of partnerships between the established black civil rights organizations and other civil rights organizations, those representing LGBTQ people, those representing the anti-bullying component of society, Jews, women. There has to be some way of establishing partnerships between these organizations, because they are all concerned about civil rights.
And they're all human concerns.
Exactly.
So these are all organizations, they're civil rights organizations, but whatever they might be called, they're all concerned about the human condition.
Yeah, the human condition and the fact that constitutional civil rights of all people should be respected, and also the human rights of people should be respected. And I think that's the importance of what I mean when I say that there have to be these partnerships. And I think the NAACP is taking that into account, because in some cases it has established partnerships with LGBTQ political advocacy groups. Other black civil rights movements have been pressed, organizations rather, have been pressed around that issue as well. So that's the future. If we don't look toward the future in terms of the partnerships that we can establish between various civil rights organizations, then I would say we don't have much of a future in terms of the fight for civil rights and the fight for human rights.
Well, how does the political party fit into how these organizations operate?
Well, I think one of the problems we have is that on the Republican side is that you don't get a lot of support for civil rights organizations. When you talk about civil rights organizations, you're talking primarily about Democratic Party supported organizations. The Republican Party is not known for strong support for NAACP and CORE and Urban League and these political advocacy groups for LGBTQ and women. We need universal support, so to speak, from the larger American society for these organizations, because they speak to what? our vision of making America truly
Great
democratic
again.
and truly great again.
That's it. We can make America great
Exactly.
again. But,
We talk about the struggle for human rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You can't have that without these organizations because there are always segments of society that are oppressed because of color, because of religion, because of national background. And I think these civil rights organizations, this is what they are targeting when they talk about the need to make America truly democratic and truly inclusive of all people, irrespective of race and color, religion, national origin, politics, etc.
well, Dr. Baldwin, I think we've been involved in this kind of discussion over the last 25 or 30 years.
Absolutely.
And I think that the question can be asked, have we been wasting our time?
Yeah, that's a question, but I don't think so. I think we have to understand, and certainly we know, that we have made progress since the civil rights movement. Civil rights organizations have been a major part of that progress, and I think that will continue in the future. We're looking toward the 2020 presidential election, and I think these civil rights organizations will play a major role.
Very good.
In getting people registered to vote. We know that in the 1960s, take SNCC for an example, voter registration was primarily a primary agenda, part of their primary agenda. Going into black communities, launching grassroots efforts to register people to vote and to get them to the polls. I think you'll see that in 2020 with not only groups like the NAACP, but you'll see that with civil rights movements outside of the black community. You'll see it with CORE, you'll see it with Urban League, you'll see it with the National Action Network of Dr. Al Sharpton. So I'm very hopeful about the future in terms of the survival of these organizations and the pivotal role that they will play in not only advancing the civil and human rights of people, but getting people more toward the goal of economic empowerment and economic self-sufficiency.
Yeah, there's a lot to be done.
Yes.
And I think that, and as you said, we've come a long way.
Yeah.
But they say we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
Yes.
In order that we might be able to truly recognize that we have a democratic society and that in a real sense all men and women are created equal in the society in which we live. That's
and we need to get beyond this idea that civil rights organizations have outlived their relevance.
Oh, yes.
That they've outlived their usefulness, that they are anachronisms, because that's not true. We need them as much today as we did in the 1950s and 60s.
The needs are still the same.
The needs are the same, and in many ways it's a more pressing need for these kind of organizations, given what's happening with immigrants today and people of color today, Muslims who have targeted in our society today for violence and that kind of thing. We know about the burning of the black churches in Louisiana a couple of weeks ago. Hey, we saw that in the late 19th century. We saw it in the 50s and 60s.
Nothing has changed.
Yeah, so the more things change, the more they remain the same. And thus the need for what? Civil rights organizations to make sure that we are a society that respects, that honors, that affirms the civil and human rights of all people.
These are organizations that have been important and will continue to be
play
an important role.
Yes, I don't see any point at this point. I don't see
anything that could replace them. I mean, what would you, if they were not there, what would there be?
Yeah, we'd be in big trouble. The only problem now is that we need to get people to realize that they are still relevant and to launch efforts to support these groups and to be a part of them and to adopt their vision and understand that our future depends on how we implement that vision and how we fulfill that vision of a totally democratic society that is rooted in participatory democracy.
If we could get the right for every individual to vote in America, then I think that every individual of age and et cetera, the right to vote. I think that should be the central consideration of all of these organizations, no matter how they might be organized or whatever.
And I think it will be. I think it will be, because I think people realize that the 2020 elections coming up are very important, and that they may determine where we go in the future.
Either
whether or
move
not
forward or backward.
we'll see a future that involves victory and triumph, or whether we'll move down a dark alley of defeat. And I think that's important.
And each of us have the ability to be able to make that decision. And all we have to do is to be able to make it in our own mind.
Exactly.
Each person has to make an individual statement in reference to how he or she stands in reference to our African American voter participation or general voter participation, et cetera.
And we can do that through our support for civil rights.
Civil rights organizations.
Of every kind, not just in the black community, but civil rights organizations that represent different demographics or segments of the society. LGBTQ people, women, Asians, Hispanics, we all have a role in those kinds of civil rights organizations.
And of course, Dr. Baldwin, let me thank you for that excellent information, and let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.